I'm Angela Morrison, and I'm 29 years old. Christmas morning should have been about family, love, and forgiveness. Instead, it became the day my own sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't want a poor policewoman ruining my wedding photos." The whole family laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I simply replied, "I understand." What they didn't know was that in 6 months they'd be calling me in complete desperation, begging for help from the same poor policewoman they'd just humiliated. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely dismissed by family during what should have been a celebration. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how this whole mess started, because trust me, karma has a wicked sense of humor. I'd been a patrol officer with Denver PD for 5 years, working my way up to detective through sheer determination and countless overtime shifts. While other women my age were posting Instagram selfies from fancy brunches, I was studying crime scenes and testifying in court. Not exactly glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me purpose. My family, however, had very different ideas about success. My parents, Carol and Richard Morrison, were hardworking people who'd spent their lives in service jobs. Dad drove trucks, Mom worked retail, and they'd sacrificed everything to give their daughters better opportunities. When I chose law enforcement over a college degree, they acted like I'd personally betrayed their life's work. My younger sister Brittany was everything they'd hoped for in a daughter. Marketing degree, trendy downtown job, designer clothes, and a social media presence that made our extended family think she'd made it. At 25, she was their success story. Me? I was the daughter who settled for less. That's how Derek Patterson entered our family story. Brittany brought him to our traditional Christmas Eve dinner, practically glowing with excitement. He was handsome in that expensive way that screamed money and status. Perfect hair, designer clothes, and a smile that was probably practiced in the mirror. "Derek works in finance," Brittany announced proudly as Mom fussed over her famous prime rib. "He manages investment portfolios for high-net-worth clients." I watched my parents' eyes light up at the words high net worth. Suddenly, Derek wasn't just Brittany's boyfriend. He was their ticket to respectability. Derek was charming, I'll give him that. He complimented Mom's cooking, asked Dad about his truck routes, and seemed genuinely interested in our family traditions. But something about the way he looked at Brittany made my cop instincts tingle. It wasn't love I saw there. It was ownership. When Brittany excused herself to help Mom with dessert, Derek turned his attention to me with that practiced smile. "So, Angela, Brittany tells me you're a police officer," he said, his tone suggesting I'd admitted to being a professional snake handler. "Detective, actually," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Just made the promotion last month." "How interesting," Derek said, and I caught the slight pause. Must be dangerous work. All those criminals and unpleasant situations. There was something in his voice, a subtle dismissal that made my skin crawl. Like my career was something distasteful that polite people didn't discuss at dinner. "Someone has to do it," I said simply. "True," Derek agreed with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Though I imagine Brittany worries about you constantly. Such a stressful life for a young woman." Oh, this guy's good, I thought, already planting seeds about how my job affects other people. That night, driving home to my modest apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek Patterson was performing for my family. Everything about him felt calculated, from his compliments to his interest in our lives. But when I tried to share my concerns with Brittany the following week, she shut me down faster than a speeding ticket. "I know exactly what you're doing," she said, crossing her arms defensively as we sat in her trendy coffee shop of choice. "You can't stand that I found someone successful who treats me well." "That's not true," I protested. "I just think you should take things slow. You've only been dating him for 2 months." "2 amazing months," she corrected. "Derek is everything I've ever wanted in a partner. He's successful, ambitious, and he actually wants to build a future together. Unlike some people who date other cops and call it settling." The dig at my boyfriend Marcus stung, but I pushed past it. "Brittany, I've seen this before in my work. The early signs of controlling behavior can be subtle." "Oh, here we go," she laughed bitterly. "Detective Morrison is going to psychoanalyze my relationship based on her experience with criminals. Newsflash, Angela. Not every successful man is a predator just because you spend your days dealing with the worst of society." Her words hit like a slap, but I tried once more. "I'm not saying Derek is a criminal. I'm saying some of his behavior feels possessive. The way he steers conversations, how he answers questions for you." "You mean how he's protective and attentive?" Brittany interrupted. "How he actually cares about my thoughts and feelings? You wouldn't understand because you've never had someone treat you like you're precious." "Precious," I thought sarcastically. "Is that what we're calling isolation these days?" I left that coffee shop knowing I'd lost the first battle in what would become a 6-month war for my sister's soul. Derek Patterson had already started rewriting Brittany's reality, and I was now cast as the jealous older sister who couldn't handle her success. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of Derek's master plan. Over the next few months, I watched my sister disappear piece by piece, like watching someone slowly sink in quicksand while insisting they're just getting comfortable. The changes started small. Brittany stopped showing up to our monthly sister lunches, claiming Derek had planned surprise romantic gestures that always seemed to coincide with our standing dates. When I suggested rescheduling, she'd get defensive and accuse me of not understanding how relationships work, because clearly I'm just a lonely cop who doesn't know what real love looks like, I thought every time she canceled. Then came the bigger changes. Brittany quit her marketing job, the one she'd worked so hard to get and had loved talking about for hours. Derek thinks I'll be happier focusing on our relationship and planning our future together, she explained when I expressed concern. He makes more than enough money for both of us, and he wants me to feel secure and cherished. But you loved that job, I reminded her. You used to light up talking about your campaigns and client presentations. That was before I understood what really matters, she replied with a dreamy expression that looked more vacant than content. What really matters, I noted silently, being whatever Derek wants you to be. The engagement happened 4 months into their relationship. Derek proposed at an expensive restaurant with a ring that probably cost more than my annual salary, and suddenly Brittany was completely absorbed in wedding planning and pleasing her fiancé. The engagement party was held at Derek's country club, the kind of place where I felt underdressed despite wearing my best outfit. I watched Derek work the room like a politician, introducing Brittany as my beautiful fiancée, while keeping a possessive hand on her lower back at all times. Classic controlling behavior, I observed. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a poor policewoman. The breaking point came when Brittany started telling a funny story about college, something that had always been one of her favorite tales. Halfway through, Derek interrupted with a laugh that sounded forced. "Sweetheart, I don't think our guests want to hear about your wild college days," he said, with what passed for affectionate teasing. "Let's tell them about our honeymoon plans instead." Brittany's face fell for just a second before she plastered on a bright smile and seamlessly shifted to discussing their upcoming trip to Italy. But I caught that moment of hurt, and it confirmed every instinct I'd been trying to ignore. There's my sister, I thought, still in there somewhere, just buried under layers of manipulation. After the party, I cornered Derek in the parking lot while Brittany was saying goodbye to friends inside. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. Derek's polished facade slipped slightly. "About what, Angela?" "About how you treat my sister. The interrupting, the controlling behavior, the way you're isolating her from her family and friends." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "You know what your problem is, Angela. You're jealous. Brittany found happiness and success, and you can't stand it because your own life is going nowhere." Wow, straight to the personal attacks. How original. "My life is fine," I replied evenly. "I'm concerned about my sister's well-being." "Are you?" Derek stepped closer, trying to intimidate me with his height. "Because from where I stand, you're a bitter older sister who can't handle being overshadowed by someone younger and more successful." I held my ground, drawing on years of police training. "Success isn't about money, Derek. It's about respecting the people you claim to love." "Respect?" Derek laughed coldly. "Like the respect you showed by trying to psychoanalyze our relationship from day one? Brittany told me about your little theories." "Of course he knows. He's been poisoning her against me this whole time." "If you keep spreading these ridiculous accusations," Derek continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you're going to destroy your relationship with Brittany permanently. Is that what you want?" Before I could respond, Brittany appeared beside us, slightly breathless from hurrying across the parking lot. "What's going on? You two look serious," she said, glancing between us suspiciously. Derek's transformation was instant and impressive. The threatening expression vanished, replaced by his charming smile. "Just getting to know each other better. You know how it is when family wants to make sure you're being taken care of." Such a performance. I'm almost impressed by how quickly he can switch personas. "Well, good," Brittany said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "I want my favorite people to get along." As we drove home separately that night, I made a decision that would haunt me for months. I decided to step back, to stop pushing, to hope that maybe Derek would show his true colors before it was too late. That was my first mistake. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to keep fighting, even when they hate you for it. But Derek Patterson was just getting started with his campaign to erase my sister and replace her with his perfect, compliant wife. The wedding planning became an exercise in watching Brittany disappear entirely into Derek's vision of their perfect life. Every decision went through him first. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, even the style of dress had to meet his approval. It's like watching someone slowly delete themselves, I thought, as Brittany explained why they'd chosen Derek's preferred caterer over the one she'd originally loved. Mom was in heaven, finally getting to plan the elaborate wedding she'd always dreamed of for one of her daughters. She threw herself into the preparations with an enthusiasm that would have been touching if it wasn't so misguided. Derek has such sophisticated taste, Mom gushed during one of our family dinners. He's really elevating Brittany's standards. Elevating her standards? I mused silently. Is that what we're calling erasing her personality now? Dad stressed about the costs. Even though Derek had insisted on covering most expenses, there were still countless smaller items that added up, and I watched my father work extra shifts to ensure he could contribute with dignity. All this financial stress so Brittany can marry a man who thinks she needs improvement, I observed as Dad rubbed his tired eyes over the latest invoice. 3 months before the wedding, he got a call that would change everything. Angela? Brittany's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. Can you come over? I need to talk to someone. I found her in her apartment, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her since childhood. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a tissue box like a lifeline. What happened? I asked, settling beside her on the couch. Derek and I had a fight, she admitted, her voice breaking. He says I'm being too emotional about the wedding planning, that I need to trust him to handle the important decisions. Too emotional about her own wedding, the audacity of this man. What kind of decisions? I asked carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral. Everything, apparently, she said with a bitter laugh. The music, the decorations, even the guest list. He says I get too caught up in sentimental details that don't matter for the sophisticated image we need to project. Sophisticated image. Translation? Nothing that reflects who Brittany actually is. What's the specific issue? I pressed gently. I wanted to include some songs that are meaningful to us, but Derek says they don't fit the elegant atmosphere he's creating. Her voice cracked. One of them was our first dance song from when we started dating. He's literally erasing their history together. Classic abuser move. Make them doubt their own memories and feelings. Have you told him how important those songs are to you? I tried, but then he got upset and said I was being selfish, that I needed to think about our guests and what kind of impression we want to make as a couple. She looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than her 25 years. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am being too sentimental. And there it is. The self-doubt he's been carefully cultivating. Brittany, I said gently, it's your wedding. Your feelings about the music aren't selfish. They're the whole point. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sister I remembered, the one who would fight for what mattered to her. But then it was gone, replaced by the anxious woman Derek had crafted. You don't understand, she said, pulling away from me. Derek has a reputation to maintain. These events are important for his career. I need to support him, not make things harder with my emotional attachments. Emotional attachment. He's taught her to see her own feelings as weaknesses. Since when are your feelings something to be ashamed of? I asked, unable to keep the frustration from my voice. Since I grew up and realized that successful relationships require compromise, she snapped, clearly parroting Derek's words. Something you might understand if you ever prioritize someone else's needs over your own opinions. Compromise. Is that what we're calling one-sided surrender now? The conversation continued for another hour, with me listening as Brittany performed elaborate mental gymnastics to justify Derek's behavior. By the time I left, I understood that she'd invested too much of herself in this relationship to admit she'd made a mistake. 2 weeks later, the wedding invitations went out. Beautiful, expensive stationery with elegant calligraphy. Everything chosen to reflect Derek's vision of their perfect day. I waited for mine to arrive, and waited, and waited. Surely there's been some mistake, I told myself. She's my sister. Of course I'll be invited to her wedding. Christmas Eve arrived with no invitation in sight. The whole family gathered at Mom and Dad's house for our traditional dinner. Brittany swept in late, radiant in a designer dress I'd never seen before, carrying an armload of beautifully wrapped gifts. One by one, she distributed presents to everyone. Mom, Dad, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Jim, their kids. Perfect packages with everyone's names written in her careful script. When the distribution was complete, there was an awkward silence as everyone realized what hadn't happened. Brittany, Mom said gently, I think you forgot Angela. Here it comes, I thought, bracing myself for what I somehow already knew was coming. No, I didn't forget, Brittany replied with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was very careful about my list. The room went silent except for the soft Christmas music playing in the background. Our 12-year-old cousin Jake, who had no filter, spoke up first. Why didn't Angela get a present? Did she do something bad? And that's when my sister delivered the line that would echo in family legend forever. I didn't give Angela a present because I don't want a poor policewoman ruining my wedding photos. Well, I thought as the room erupted in shocked murmurs. At least now I know where I stand. Have you ever experienced that moment when someone you love shows you exactly how little you mean to them? Share your experiences in the comments below. The silence that followed Brittany's announcement was deafening. Around the room, I watched our relatives' faces cycle through shock, confusion, and secondhand embarrassment for what they were witnessing. This is it, I thought. This is the moment my sister officially chooses a man she's known for 6 months over the family who's loved her for 25 years. What do you mean she won't be at your wedding? Dad asked, his voice tight with the kind of controlled anger I'd only heard when someone threatened his children. I mean, Brittany continued with that same artificially bright tone, that Derek and I have decided we want only supportive people at our celebration. People who actually want to see us happy. Supportive people. Translation, people who won't ask uncomfortable questions about why the bride looks terrified. Mom's face had gone pale. Brittany Morrison, what is this about? It's about the fact that Angela has done nothing but try to sabotage my relationship since day one, Brittany replied, finally looking directly at me. She's been negative and jealous from the beginning, and I refuse to let her ruin the most important day of my negative and jealous. Derek's greatest hits, coming straight out of my sister's mouth. I felt everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to list all the ways I'd tried to support her despite my concerns. Part of me wanted to ask how she could throw away 25 years of sisterhood for a man who was systematically erasing her personality. Instead, I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone so lost in Derek's manipulation that she genuinely believed what she was saying. I understand, I said quietly. 2 words. That's all it took to completely derail Derek's expected drama. Brittany blinked, clearly thrown off balance. She'd obviously prepared for tears, arguments, or some kind of emotional scene that would validate her narrative about my instability. You understand? She repeated uncertainly. I understand that you're doing what you think is best for your relationship, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the pain crushing my chest. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. Kill them with kindness, as my training instructor used to say. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one they don't expect. The rest of the evening proceeded in stilted conversation, with our extended family clearly uncomfortable, but unsure how to address what had just happened. Brittany had expected a fight that would prove I was the problem. Instead, my calm acceptance left everyone wondering what kind of man convinces a woman to exile her own sister. Derek probably didn't anticipate this reaction, I mused as I helped Mom clean up later. He's used to creating chaos and then positioning himself as the solution. After everyone else had left, Mom cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That wasn't my daughter talking tonight, she said quietly. That was someone else's words coming out of her mouth. I know, Mom. Should we do something? Stage an intervention? Call Derek and tell him he's not welcome in this family? I paused in drying dishes, considering how to explain what I'd learned about domestic abuse during my police training. When someone is in an emotionally abusive relationship, forcing them to choose between their abuser and their family usually backfires, I said carefully. They choose the abuser, and then they're more isolated than before. So we just let this happen? We let her know we love her and we'll be here when she needs us, I replied, and we hope that's enough. Though privately, I'm planning to be on duty the day of her wedding. Something tells me Derek Patterson is going to show his true colors eventually, and when he does, my family is going to need a cop. Mom nodded, but I could see the heartbreak in her eyes. I keep thinking I should have seen this coming, should have done something sooner. Mom, Derek is a professional manipulator. This isn't your fault. How do you know that? About abusers, I mean? Because I've arrested dozens of them, I said grimly. They all follow the same playbook. Isolate the victim, make them doubt their own judgment, convince them that anyone who questions the relationship is the real problem. And Derek Patterson has been executing that playbook perfectly from day one. That night, lying in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had happened. My sister had chosen her fiancé over her family, publicly humiliated me in front of our relatives, and there was nothing I could do about it except wait. 6 months, I told myself. In 6 months, this will either be resolved or it will be permanent. I had no way of knowing that in exactly 6 months, I'd get the most frantic phone call of my life from the very people who had just watched me get exiled from the family. Sometimes the best revenge is just being ready when karma comes calling. 3 days after Christmas, I volunteered to work the weekend shift that coincided with Brittany's wedding. If I was going to miss my sister's big day, I might as well spend it doing something meaningful. Besides, I thought with dark humor, Something tells me I'm going to be busy that day anyway. The months leading up to Brittany's wedding were surreal. Our family learned to navigate conversations around the elephant in the room, the daughter and sister who would be absent from the most important day of Brittany's life. It's like having a family member die, I thought during one particularly awkward Sunday dinner, except they're still alive and actively choosing to hurt you. Mom threw herself into spoiling our cousin's kids, lavishing attention on them that she couldn't give to wedding preparations. Dad worked longer hours, claiming he needed the overtime, but really just avoiding discussions about his youngest daughter's upcoming marriage. We're all just pretending this is normal, I observed as we sat around the dinner table making small talk about everything except the wedding that was consuming all of our thoughts. For me, work became a refuge. I'd recently been assigned to a domestic violence task force, and the irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping strangers escape abusive relationships while being powerless to save my own sister. At least someone's family gets a happy ending, I thought after successfully helping a woman leave her controlling husband. The cases were heartbreaking but educational. I worked with women who had been exactly where Brittany was now, isolated from family, convinced that their partner's controlling behavior was love, trapped in relationships that were slowly destroying their sense of self. One case particularly haunted me. Jennifer Walsh, a 26-year-old teacher whose boyfriend had convinced her to quit her job, cut contact with her family, and depend on him completely. When she finally found the courage to leave, she had nowhere to go. I kept thinking he would change, she told me during her interview, that if I just tried harder to be the perfect girlfriend, he'd go back to being the man I fell in love with. Did that man ever really exist? I asked gently. Jennifer considered this for a long moment. I don't think so. I think I fell in love with a performance, and by the time I realized it wasn't real, I'd already given up everything that mattered to me. Just like Brittany, I thought grimly, except she hasn't realized it's a performance yet. 2 weeks before the wedding, something unexpected happened. Derek called me. This should be interesting, I thought as his name appeared on my caller ID. Angela. His voice was smooth and confident. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. What do you want, Derek? I wanted to extend an olive branch, he said. Brittany has been more emotional than usual about the family situation, and I thought maybe we could work something out. Emotional. Of course she's emotional. You made her choose between her family and her fiancé. I'm listening, I said, curious to see where this was going. The wedding is in 2 weeks, and despite our differences, I know how much it would mean to Brittany to have her sister there. So I'm willing to overlook our past disagreements and extend you an invitation. How magnanimous of him. The man who orchestrated my exile is now graciously offering to let me back in. That's very generous of you, I replied, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. I am being generous, Derek continued, either missing my tone or choosing to ignore it. But there would be conditions. Of course there would be. Can't have me there without complete capitulation first. What kind of conditions? You'd need to publicly apologize to Brittany for the problems you've caused in our relationship, acknowledge that you were wrong about me, and commit to being supportive of our marriage going forward. Let me get this straight. I have to humiliate myself, validate his narrative that I'm the problem, and promise to never question his treatment of my sister again. And if I refuse, I asked, then Brittany will have to accept that her sister chose her own pride over being there for the most important day of her life. The manipulation is almost artistic. He's managed to make my absence at the wedding my choice instead of his decision. I leaned back in my chair, studying the ceiling of my apartment while I processed his offer. Derek was essentially asking me to validate every lie he'd told Brittany about me, to publicly humble myself, and to promise not to interfere if he continued isolating and controlling her. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, but I'll need an answer by Friday. We're finalizing the seating arrangements. Because heaven forbid there's an empty chair to remind everyone that the bride's sister was deliberately excluded. After he hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, weighing my options. I could swallow my pride, apologize for crimes I hadn't committed, and watch my sister marry a man who would continue to abuse her. Or I could maintain my integrity and miss what might be my last chance to be part of Brittany's life. Either way, Derek wins, I realized. If I grovel, he's proven he can control me too. If I refuse, he gets to blame me for choosing pride over family. That night, I called my boyfriend Marcus and asked him to meet me for dinner. Over terrible Chinese food and decent wine, I explained Derek's generous offer. He wants you to publicly humiliate yourself, Marcus said bluntly. This isn't about making peace. It's about establishing dominance. I know, I sighed. But if I don't do it, I'll never see my sister again. If you do it, you'll be teaching him that he can manipulate you just like he manipulates her, Marcus countered. Plus, you'll be validating every lie he's told her about you being the problem. Marcus is right, and I know it. But the thought of Brittany walking down the aisle without any family there to support her is breaking my heart. I spent the rest of the week agonizing over the decision, imagining different scenarios and their outcomes. Finally, Friday afternoon arrived, and Derek was expecting his answer. I appreciate the offer, I told him when he answered his phone, but I can't agree to your conditions. That's unfortunate, Derek replied, though he sounded more satisfied than disappointed. I hope you can live with this decision, Angela. I hope Brittany can live with yours, I shot back, and hung up. There. It's done. I chose my integrity over my sister's wedding, and now I get to live with the consequences. That weekend, I volunteered for extra shifts. If I was going to miss my sister's wedding, I was going to spend the day doing something that actually mattered. Besides, I thought with grim humor, something tells me I'm going to get called in anyway. Saturday, June 15th arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies, gentle breeze, the kind of day that makes you believe in fairy tale endings. Too bad I was spending it dealing with domestic disputes and traffic violations instead of watching my sister get married. Probably for the best, I mused as I filed paperwork at the station. At least this way I'm helping people instead of watching someone I love make the biggest mistake of her life. I'd volunteered for the day shift, telling my sergeant I had no other plans. What I didn't mention was that working kept my mind off the fact that my sister was walking down the aisle without a single member of her immediate family in attendance. Well, technically Mom and Dad are there, I corrected myself. They're just sitting there pretending this is normal, while their daughter marries a man who convinced her to exile her own sister. The morning started quietly. A fender bender with no injuries. A noise complaint at an apartment complex. Routine patrol activities that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. For almost 4 hours, I managed not to think about what was happening at the Riverside Country Club. Then my radio crackled to life. Unit 347. We need you to respond to a domestic disturbance at the Riverside Country Club. Multiple callers reporting a large altercation in progress. You've got to be kidding me. Unit 347 responding, I replied, my heart rate immediately spiking as I flipped on my lights and sirens. The Riverside Country Club, Brittany's wedding venue. This can't be a coincidence. Before I could process the implications, my personal phone started ringing. Mom's name appeared on the caller ID, and I answered on speaker while navigating traffic. Angela! Mom's voice was high and panicked. You need to get here right now. Mom, I'm already on my way. What happened? It's the wedding. Derek hit Brittany in front of everyone. There's a huge fight and people are screaming and we don't know what to do. Called it. I literally called this happening. Is Brittany hurt? I asked, professional training kicking in despite the personal nature of the situation. I think so. She locked herself in the bridal suite and won't come out. Derek's family is defending him and our family is going crazy and there's 300 people here and it's chaos. 300 witnesses to domestic violence. Derek really knows how to make a statement. Mom, I need you to stay away from Derek and his family until I get there, okay? Don't engage with anyone who's defending him. Okay, but hurry. Dad looks like he's about to kill someone. The drive to the country club took 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. As I pulled into the parking lot, I could see the chaos even from outside. Well-dressed wedding guests were scattered across the lawn, some crying, others arguing, several taking videos with their phones. Great. My sister's assault is about to go viral. I radioed for backup and an ambulance, then grabbed my equipment and headed inside. The main ballroom looked like a tornado had hit an elegant wedding reception. Tables were overturned, flowers scattered everywhere, and at least 50 people were engaged in heated arguments. In the center of it all stood Derek Patterson, his tuxedo disheveled and his face red with rage, surrounded by groomsmen trying to calm him down. There's the real Derek, I thought grimly. No more charming mask, just pure entitled fury. Where's the bride? I called out in my command voice. Upstairs, bridal suite, someone answered. She won't let anyone in. I made my way through the crowd, automatically cataloging details. Derek's right hand showed obvious signs of impact. Swollen knuckles, slight abrasion. Several wedding guests appeared intoxicated. The mother of the bride was nowhere to be seen. Poor Mom is probably having a breakdown somewhere. Upstairs, I found a cluster of women outside a locked door. Mom, Aunt Sarah, and 2 women I didn't recognize who were presumably Brittany's friends. She's been in there for 20 minutes, Mom said when she saw me, tears streaming down her face. She won't talk to anyone. I knocked gently on the door. Brittany? It's Angela. I need you to open the door. Silence. Brittany, I'm here as a police officer right now, not your sister. I need to make sure you're safe and document what happened. Can you let me in? After a long moment, I heard the lock turn. The door opened just enough for me to slip inside, then immediately closed again. My sister stood in the middle of the elegant bridal suite, still in her beautiful wedding dress, makeup ruined by tears. On the left side of her face was a vivid red handprint that was already beginning to swell. And there it is. The moment Derek's mask finally slipped completely. "Oh, honey," I whispered, my professional detachment warring with my desire to pull her into my arms. "You were right," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "You were right about everything, and I was too stupid to listen." "You weren't stupid," I replied firmly. "You were being manipulated by someone who's very good at it. And now he's shown 300 people exactly who he really is." Brittany finally looked at me, and I saw my real sister for the first time in months. "He hit me because I was dancing with Tommy," she said, her voice flat with shock. "Cousin Tommy, who we grew up with. Derek said I was flirting, that I was embarrassing him in front of his business associates. Of course. Can't have the wife showing any independence, even with family members. In front of everyone? 300 people watched my husband slap me on our wedding day," she confirmed. And then his family started making excuses for him, saying I must have done something to provoke him. Classic abuser family dynamic. Enable the perpetrator, blame the victim. Through the window, I could see more police cars arriving. My backup was here, which meant the situation downstairs was probably under control. "Brittany, I need to ask you some official questions now, okay?" She nodded. "Has Derek ever been physically violent with you before?" "Not hitting, but he's grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises. And he's threatened to hit me when he's been drinking or when I don't agree with him about something. Escalating violence. Textbook abuser behavior." We talked for another 10 minutes while I documented her injuries and statement. When we finished, I radioed downstairs to confirm that Derek had been arrested for assault. "What happens now?" Brittany asked. "Now you get medical attention, we photograph your injuries, and you decide whether you want to press charges. Everyone will know I married an abuser. Everyone already knows Derek hit you at your wedding," I pointed out. "The only question is whether you're going to let him get away with it. Plus, there's probably already video of it online." Brittany stared out the window at the parking lot where her wedding guests were slowly dispersing, their fancy outfits a stark contrast to the police cars and ambulance. "I want to press charges," she said finally. "And I want to go home with you. Home with me, the sister she exiled from her wedding." 20 minutes later, I walked my sister out of the country club. She was still in her wedding dress, but the veil was gone and her bouquet lay forgotten in the chaos. As we drove away, Brittany reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for coming when I needed you," she said. "Always," I replied. "That's what family does. Even when that family doesn't invite you to the wedding." Behind us, the country club grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the real story was just beginning. Because something tells me Derek Patterson isn't going to take this defeat lying down. The aftermath of Brittany's wedding disaster was like watching a very expensive train wreck in slow motion. Fascinating, horrifying, and absolutely everywhere you looked. Turns out when you assault your bride in front of 300 guests at an exclusive country club, people have opinions about it. Derek's mugshot appeared in the Denver Post 2 days later, alongside a headline that read, "Groom arrested for wedding day assault." The story included quotes from witnesses and became the most read article on their website that week. Nothing says sophisticated image like your domestic violence arrest going viral, I thought with satisfaction. The wedding video that someone had posted on social media before anyone could stop it showed Derek slapping Brittany, her shocked reaction, and the absolute chaos that followed. Within 24 hours, it had hundreds of thousands of views and was being shared across every platform. Derek's going to love seeing himself immortalized as the poster child for wedding day abuse. Brittany moved back in with our parents temporarily, something that would have mortified her a month earlier, but now felt like a necessary step toward reclaiming her life. "I can't believe how many people have seen that video," she said one evening as we sat on Mom's back porch sharing a bottle of wine. "My worst moment is entertainment for strangers. Your worst moment is also evidence that Derek Patterson is exactly what I said he was," I pointed out. "Sometimes public humiliation serves a purpose. Plus, now everyone who defended him at the wedding gets to watch themselves supporting an abuser on repeat." "I keep thinking about all the signs I ignored," Brittany continued. "The way he isolated me from my friends, how he had to approve everything I did, making me quit my job." "You weren't ignoring signs," I told her. "You were being systematically manipulated by someone who's very good at it. Derek didn't stumble into abusive behavior. He planned it from day one, but you saw it immediately, from the very first dinner. I have training in recognizing these patterns," I reminded her. "Plus, I wasn't falling in love with his performance. Also, I wasn't the target of his manipulation campaign." Brittany was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in her glass. "I owe you the biggest apology in the history of apologies. The way I treated you, the things I said, cutting you out of the wedding. You were under the influence of a professional manipulator, I interrupted. That wasn't really you talking. It was me, though, she insisted. Maybe I was being controlled, but I still chose to believe his version of events over your concerns. I chose to protect an abuser instead of listening to my sister. Derek's greatest achievement, making his victim feel guilty for being victimized. 3 weeks after the wedding, Derek's lawyer approached the district attorney with a plea deal: 6 months in county jail, anger management classes, and restitution for Brittany's medical expenses. 6 months? Dad exploded when we heard the offer. He destroyed our daughter's wedding and traumatized our entire family. It's actually a reasonable deal, I explained, though I understood his frustration. First-time domestic violence convictions rarely get more than that, even with video evidence. Plus, Derek's about to learn that county jail isn't exactly welcoming to men who hit women. Brittany decided to accept the plea deal, but not before making a victim impact statement that became the turning point in her healing. The hearing was held in a courtroom where I'd testified dozens of times. This time, I sat in the gallery watching my sister face her abuser in front of a judge. Your Honor, Brittany began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. When Derek Patterson hit me at our wedding, he didn't just assault me physically. He destroyed what should have been the happiest day of my life and shattered my ability to trust my own judgment. There's my sister, finding her voice again. Derek sat at the defense table looking appropriately remorseful for the cameras, but I caught him glancing at Brittany with that same possessive expression I'd seen from day one. Still thinks he owns her, even after being arrested for hitting her. But Derek's assault wasn't the end of my story, Brittany continued, her voice growing stronger. It was the beginning of my freedom. For months, he controlled what I thought, how I acted, who I spent time with. He convinced me that my family's concerns came from jealousy instead of love. The beautiful irony, Derek's need to control Brittany in public is what finally exposed him. When Derek hit me, he revealed his true nature to everyone watching. He gave me the greatest gift he could have: irrefutable proof that my sister was right about him all along. Checkmate, Derek. Your own violence became the evidence that destroyed your carefully constructed lies. After the hearing, Derek was led away in handcuffs to begin his sentence. His family left without speaking to us, their faces tight with embarrassment. Amazing how quickly enablers disappear when their golden boy's mask slips. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Brittany about her plans going forward. She handled them with a grace that impressed me. Trust your instincts, she told one reporter who asked for advice. And trust the people who love you when they express concerns. Real love doesn't isolate you from your support system. Spoken like someone who's learned the difference between love and control the hard way. That evening, we had the first family dinner in months that felt genuinely celebratory. Not because we were happy about what happened, but because we were together again. I want to go back to work, Brittany announced over Mom's pot roast. My old boss said there might be an opening in their campaigns department. Derek spent months convincing her that her career didn't matter. Time to prove him wrong. I also want to volunteer with domestic violence organizations, she continued. Help other women recognize the warning signs I missed. Nothing quite like lived experience to spot manipulation tactics. Later that night, Brittany pulled me aside with a nervous expression. I need to tell you something about Derek, she said. Before the wedding, he made threats about what would happen if I tried to leave him. Of course he did. Abusers always have backup plans. What kind of threats? He said he could make trouble for your career, file false complaints about police brutality or harassment. He claimed he had connections who could make those accusations stick. Derek Patterson, criminal mastermind. Too bad he underestimated how much evidence exists to disprove false allegations. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was terrified, she admitted. Even after he hit me, I was still scared of what he might do to hurt you. Classic abuser tactic. Threaten the people the victim loves to maintain control. Derek's credibility is pretty much shot after the wedding video, I assured her. But thanks for telling me. If he tries anything, I'll be ready. Bring it on, Derek. I've been waiting for round 2. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Derek's revenge came exactly 3 weeks after his release from jail, and it was every bit as petty and predictable as I'd expected from a man whose entire identity revolved around never facing consequences. Because nothing says I'm totally innocent, like filing false police reports to get revenge on the cop who arrested you. I was finishing my shift on a Tuesday when Sergeant Rodriguez called me into his office with the grim expression he reserved for serious problems. Close the door, Morrison. We need to talk. Here we go. Derek's playing his trump card. I've received multiple formal complaints against you, he said, spreading documents across his desk. Excessive force, harassment, abuse of authority, all filed within the past week. Multiple complaints. Derek's been busy during his 6 months of jail time planning. What kind of complaints? I asked, though I already knew this was Derek's promised retaliation. According to these witnesses, you've been targeting Derek Patterson and his associates, conducting unauthorized surveillance, making threatening phone calls. Mike opened the folder wider. There's even alleged security footage. Alleged security footage. I'd love to see Derek explain how he got footage of me doing things I never did. Mike, you know this is garbage, I said. I haven't had any contact with Derek or his people since the court hearing. I believe you, he replied, but Internal Affairs has to investigate. You're suspended with pay pending the outcome. Suspended. Derek finally found a way to make me pay for saving my sister. The first complaint came from Derek's business partner, claiming I'd followed him home and conducted unauthorized surveillance. The second was from Derek's cousin, alleging I'd pulled him over without cause and illegally searched his vehicle. The third was from Derek himself, claiming I'd made threatening phone calls to his elderly mother. Points for creativity, Derek. Though you might want to work on your timeline skills. All three complaints were detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. But Derek had spent his jail time planning this carefully. Each allegation was designed to be difficult to disprove and damaging to my career. Too bad Derek doesn't understand how much digital evidence exists in the modern world. I called Marcus immediately after leaving the station. He found me sitting in my car, staring at my badge and service weapon that I'd just turned in. This is temporary, he said, sliding into the passenger seat. IA will see through his lies. Will they? I asked. Derek's smart, Marcus. These complaints are coordinated and detailed. Even if they can't prove them, the allegations alone could end my career. Derek's betting that the investigation will take long enough to destroy my reputation, even if I'm eventually cleared. So what do? We prove he's lying, I said, feeling my determination return. Derek made one crucial mistake. He underestimated how much evidence contradicts his timeline. Never try to frame a cop for crimes they didn't commit. We're really good at documenting our whereabouts. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked harder on clearing my name than I'd ever worked on any case. Phone records, GPS data from my patrol car, security footage from businesses, anything that could establish my whereabouts during Derek's alleged incidents. The beautiful thing about living in a surveillance state is that it's almost impossible to be somewhere without leaving digital footprints. The breakthrough came from Derek's own arrogance. His business partner, the one claiming I'd stalked him, had been arrested for DUI on the same night he alleged I was following him home. Kind of hard to follow someone home when they're getting arrested 3 miles from their office. The arrest report showed Derek's partner had been picked up heading in the opposite direction from his house, drunk off his ass and driving erratically. Note to Derek, next time you fabricate witness statements, maybe check if your witnesses have alibis for being somewhere else. One by one, Derek's carefully constructed lies fell apart under scrutiny. The security footage he provided was from wrong dates. The phone records he claimed supported his harassment allegations actually proved I was testifying in court during the alleged calls. Amateur hour, Derek. This is what happens when criminals try to outsmart the legal system. But Derek's biggest mistake was getting too specific about his harassment allegations. He claimed I'd called his mother on a Tuesday at 3 p.m., making threatening statements about his safety. Unfortunately for Derek, my phone records and court transcripts proved I was giving testimony in a completely different case at that exact time. Pro tip: when filing false police reports, don't pick times when your target has ironclad alibis. Your client made a critical error, the prosecutor told Derek's lawyer during a hastily arranged meeting. He claimed Officer Morrison called his mother while she was literally testifying in court. We have audio recordings of the entire proceeding. Derek's about to learn that lying to investigators is also a crime. 3 weeks after my suspension began, I was reinstated with full back pay and a formal apology from the department. Derek, meanwhile, was arrested again, this time for filing false police reports and obstruction of justice. Round 2 goes to the poor policewoman. How's that for poetic justice? The irony wasn't lost on me that I got to arrest him again. Derek Patterson, I said, placing handcuffs on his wrists outside his office building. You're under arrest for filing false police reports and obstruction of justice. DJ vu, Derek. Though this time you won't have mommy and daddy paying for expensive lawyers. The look of rage and humiliation on his face was almost worth the weeks of stress he'd caused. You think you've won, he snarled as I led him to the patrol car. This isn't over. Actually, it is over, I replied, opening the car door. You tried to destroy my career with lies, and all you did was add more felonies to your record. Plus, now you get to explain to your cellmates why you're back in jail for filing false police reports. They're going to love that. Derek's second trial was swift and decisive. With clear evidence of his false allegations and retaliatory behavior, the judge sentenced him to 18 months in state prison. 18 months to think about how filing false police reports to get revenge on your ex-sister-in-law was maybe not your smartest career move. After the sentencing, reporters asked about having my name cleared. It feels good to be vindicated, I said honestly. But more importantly, this case sends a message that using false police reports to settle personal grudges won't be tolerated. Also, it sends a message that Derek Patterson is exactly the kind of vindictive predator I said he was from day one. That evening, my family gathered at my apartment for our new tradition, Tuesday dinners where we actually enjoy each other's company. "I'm proud of you," Dad said as we shared takeout Chinese food. "You could have backed down when Derek started lying, but you fought for what was right." "Fighting for what's right is literally my job description, Dad." "Derek made one fatal mistake," I told them. "He thought he could manipulate the legal system the same way he manipulated Brittany. But systems designed to find the truth don't respond well to charming sociopaths. Unlike vulnerable women looking for love, the justice system doesn't care how pretty your smile is." Brittany raised her wine glass. "To Angela, who saved me from the biggest mistake of my life and then saved herself from Derek's revenge." "To family," I countered, "who stick together even when manipulative abusers try to divide us." Derek Patterson's greatest failure. He actually made our family stronger by trying to destroy it. As we cleaned up dinner, I realized Derek had inadvertently given us something valuable. His attempts to control and divide us had taught us to recognize real love from manipulation. Sometimes the best education comes from the worst teachers. 6 months after Derek's second conviction, life had settled into a new normal that was infinitely better than anything I could have imagined during the height of his manipulation campaign. Funny how quickly life improves when you remove toxic people from it. Brittany had been promoted to senior campaign manager at her advertising agency, a position that utilized her creativity and independence, two qualities Derek had spent months trying to suppress. Turns out when you're not constantly walking on eggshells around an abusive partner, you can actually focus on your career. She'd also become a passionate advocate for domestic violence awareness, speaking at women's shelters and police training seminars about recognizing early warning signs. Nothing quite like personal experience to spot manipulation tactics from a mile away. My own career had not only recovered from Derek's false allegations, but had actually been strengthened by the experience. The department used my case as a training example of how to investigate fraudulent complaints, and I'd been promoted to lead a domestic violence task force. Derek's attempt to destroy my career actually ended up advancing it. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. "You know what's ironic?" Brittany said one evening over dinner. "Derek thought filing false police reports would ruin your reputation, but it actually proved you're exactly the kind of cop people can trust to handle domestic violence cases. Nothing builds credibility like being personally targeted by an abuser and still coming out on top. Plus," she continued with a grin, "watching you arrest him the second time was deeply therapeutic. I may have watched that body cam footage more than once." "You realize that footage is evidence in a criminal case, right?" I asked, trying to look stern. Though I'll admit, seeing Derek's face when he realized his revenge plan had backfired was pretty satisfying. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a news alert. "Local man dies in prison after domestic violence convictions. Derek Patterson was dead." Well, that's one way to ensure he doesn't file any more false police reports. According to the report, Derek had been found in his cell that morning, apparently the victim of a heart attack. He was 33 years old. Stress, poor prison diet, and the constant fear of being a woman beater in a population that doesn't tolerate woman beaters will do that to you. I stared at the screen, processing emotions I hadn't expected. Relief, certainly. Closure, absolutely. And surprisingly, a small amount of satisfaction that Derek had finally faced consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. No more appeals, no more legal maneuvering, no more chances to hurt anyone else. "What is it?" Brittany asked, noticing my expression. I turned my phone so she could see the headline. She read it twice, then set it down calmly. "How do you feel?" I asked. Brittany was quiet for a moment, staring out the window. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time since I met him, I feel completely, utterly free. The ultimate liberation, knowing your abuser can never hurt you again. No guilt, no sadness. Should I feel guilty for being relieved that a man who terrorized me is gone?" she asked. "Because I don't. I feel like I can finally exhale completely." Perfectly normal reaction. Abusers don't earn grief just by dying. Derek's death brought predictable responses from various quarters. His family issued a statement describing him as a troubled but loving man who struggled with personal demons. Troubled and loving. The classic abuser obituary, rewrite history to make the perpetrator sympathetic. The statement made no mention of his victims or the lives he'd damaged. Some people, it seemed, would enable Derek even in death. Can't admit their golden boy was a predator, even when there's video evidence and multiple convictions. Several people reached out to offer Brittany condolences, apparently thinking she should mourn her deceased ex-husband. Because nothing says thoughtful sympathy like telling an abuse survivor they should grieve their abuser. Mrs. Patterson? One well-meaning friend called her. I'm so sorry for your loss. It's Ms. Morrison, Brittany corrected gently. And thank you, but I'm not in mourning. Brittany's learning to set boundaries even in awkward social situations. Character growth at its finest. The most surprising response came from Derek's mother, who called Brittany directly 2 days after the funeral. I need to apologize, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice heavy with emotion. I spent so much time defending Derek that I never acknowledged what he did to you. Better late than never, I suppose. Finding Derek's journals in his apartment opened my eyes, she continued. He wrote about his plans to control you, to isolate you from your family. He actually enjoyed making you doubt yourself. Derek kept journals documenting his abuse tactics, because of course he did. Narcissists love to document their perceived cleverness. Mrs. Patterson, Brittany said gently, you're not responsible for Derek's choices. But I enabled him, she replied. Every time he got in trouble, I made excuses. I taught him that he could hurt people without consequences. The painful recognition that love without boundaries becomes enabling. After the call ended, Brittany sat quietly processing the conversation. Do you think she's right? She asked. That his mother's enabling made him worse? Derek was responsible for Derek's choices, I replied. But yes, people who consistently excuse bad behavior make it easier for that behavior to escalate. The difference between supporting someone and enabling their worst instincts. That weekend, we drove up to the mountains for a hiking trip, something we'd done as kids, but hadn't managed in years. As we climbed familiar trails surrounded by autumn colors, I felt like we were finally back to being ourselves. Amazing how much easier it is to enjoy life when you're not constantly worried about someone you love being destroyed by a manipulative partner. I've been thinking about dating again, Brittany said as we stopped at a scenic overlook. How do you feel about that? Terrified and excited, she admitted. The scary part is trusting my judgment again. How do I know I won't fall for another Derek? Valid concern. Abusers often target people recovering from previous abuse. Because now you know what warning signs look like, I replied. And because you have people who will speak up if they see red flags. Plus, you've learned the difference between protective concern and jealous manipulation. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Promise that if you ever have concerns about someone I'm dating, you'll tell me immediately. Even if I get defensive, even if it causes a fight. The most important lesson Derek taught us, trust the people who love you when they express concerns. I promise. But you have to promise me something too. What? Promise to trust yourself. Derek spent months convincing you that your instincts were wrong, but they weren't. You knew something was off about him from the beginning? Your gut instincts are usually right. The trick is learning to trust them over charming manipulation. As we headed back down the mountain, I reflected on how much had changed in 2 years. Derek Patterson had entered our lives like a hurricane, destroying everything he touched. But in the end, his cruelty had only made us stronger and more aware. Sometimes the worst experiences teach you the most valuable lessons. Derek had tried to destroy my sister and divide our family. Instead, he'd given us unshakable bonds and the knowledge to recognize real love from manipulation. Thanks for the education, Derek. Rest in whatever peace manipulative abusers get. 1 year after the wedding disaster that changed everything, Brittany called me with news that made my heart skip with both joy and protective concern. I'm dating someone, she announced without preamble when I answered the phone. Here we go. The moment of truth. Has she really learned to spot manipulation? Or is she vulnerable to another Derek? Tell me about him, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. His name is James Chen, and before you start profiling him, he's a pediatric nurse at Denver General. We met at a domestic violence awareness seminar where I was speaking. A nurse who attends domestic violence seminars. Either he's genuinely interested in the cause, or he's really good at targeting vulnerable women. He approached me afterward to thank me for my presentation and share his experience working with kids from abusive homes. Brittany continued. When he asked me out, he immediately said we could meet somewhere public and I could bring a friend if that would make me feel safer. Okay, that's either genuine sensitivity or very sophisticated manipulation. Time to meet this guy. When do I get to vet him? I asked. Brittany laughed. Tomorrow night. Family dinner at Mom and Dad's. Fair warning, he's nervous about meeting the cop sister who saved me from my abusive ex-husband. Smart man. He should be nervous. The next evening, I arrived at our parents' house prepared to conduct the most thorough informal interrogation of my life. What I found was a man who clearly understood that dating a domestic violence survivor meant earning the approval of her protective family. James was average height with kind eyes and an easy smile that seemed genuine rather than practiced. He'd brought flowers for Mom, wine for Dad, and homemade cookies. thoughtful gestures that immediately endeared him to my parents. Either he's naturally considerate or he's done his research on how to charm protective families. "You must be Angela," he said when Brittany introduced us. "Thank you for being there for Brittany when she needed you most." Good opening. Acknowledging what happened without making it weird. During dinner, I watched their interactions with the intensity of a detective investigating a crime. James's attention to Brittany was protective without being possessive, attentive without being controlling. When she expressed opinions, he listened thoughtfully instead of dismissing or correcting her. So far, so good. But Derek was charming at first, too. Most tellingly, when Brittany mentioned her advocacy work, James's face lit up with genuine pride. "She's incredible at it," he told us. Last month, she helped a woman leave her abuser after months of failed professional interventions. Brittany has this way of connecting with survivors that cuts through fear and confusion. Derek would have minimized her work or redirected attention to himself. James is celebrating her accomplishments. After dinner, I cornered James in the kitchen while Brittany helped Dad with computer problems. Time for the real interrogation. "So," I said, leaning against the counter, "what are your intentions with my sister?" James smiled at my directness. "I intend to love her, support her dreams, and never make her choose between me and the people who matter to her." Good answer. But let's dig deeper. Do you understand what she's been through? Dating someone who survived an abusive relationship comes with challenges. "I do understand," James said seriously. "I grew up in a house with domestic violence. My father abused my mother for years before she found the courage to leave. Personal experience with abuse. That could go either way. Either he learned to recognize unhealthy patterns, or he learned to perpetuate them. I know how long it takes to rebuild trust," he continued, "and I know that healing isn't linear. I've been patient with Brittany's boundaries, and I'll continue to be patient as long as she needs." Patience with boundaries. Derek saw boundaries as challenges to overcome. We talked for 20 more minutes, and by the end, I was cautiously optimistic. James seemed to understand trauma responses, respected Brittany's independence, and had realistic expectations about their relationship timeline. Too good to be true? Or genuinely decent? Time will tell. 6 months later, James called to ask permission before proposing. A man who asks the family's blessing before proposing. Either he's old-fashioned in the best way, or he's playing a very long game. "I love your daughter," he told my parents over Sunday dinner, "and I want to spend my life making her happy, but I know how important family is to her, so I wanted your blessing first." Dad actually teared up. "Son, you've already proven yourself." The answer is yes. Dad's stamp of approval. After Derek, that means something. The proposal itself was perfect in its simplicity. James took Brittany to the coffee shop where they'd had their first date, arranged for privacy, and proposed with a ring he'd designed himself. Personal, intimate, focused on their relationship instead of public spectacle. The anti-Derek approach. "He told me he loved me exactly as I am," Brittany said when she called afterward. "He said he didn't want to change anything about me, that I was already perfect." The opposite of Derek, who spent months systematically changing everything about her. "When's the wedding?" I asked. "Next spring." Small ceremony, just family and close friends. "And Angela?" Her voice got emotional. "I want you to be my maid of honor." From exiled sister to maid of honor. Character development at its finest. "James suggested it," she continued. "He said the person who saved my life should stand next to me when I start my new one. This James fellow is saying all the right things. Let's hope he means them." The wedding planning was everything the first one hadn't been. Brittany made every decision herself, consulting James for input, but never deferring to his preferences over her own. She's learned the difference between compromise and capitulation. Most importantly, she was excited about the marriage, not just the wedding. "I can't wait to be married to him," she told me during dress shopping. "Not because I want to be married in general, but because I want to be married to James specifically." The difference between loving a person and loving the idea of a relationship. "With Derek, I was in love with the fantasy of the life we'd build together," she explained. "With James, I'm in love with who he actually is." Derek sold her a performance. James is offering reality. The night before the wedding, Brittany asked me to walk with her in the hotel garden. "I need to thank you," she said as we reached a small gazebo, "for never giving up on me. Even when I was awful to you, you never stopped fighting for me. Fighting for family is what we do, even when they're too manipulated to appreciate it. Derek's family enabled his abuse," she continued, "but our family fought to save me from it. That makes all the difference. The difference between love that protects and love that enables." Standing there together, I realized that Derek Patterson's attempt to destroy our family had actually taught us how strong we really were. Sometimes the worst attacks reveal your greatest strengths. "Tomorrow is going to be perfect," Brittany said softly. Yes, I agreed. It is. Second weddings done right, with real love, genuine respect, and family who actually supports the union. The second wedding was everything the first one should have been, a celebration of love rather than a performance designed to impress people who didn't matter. Amazing how much more relaxed everyone is when the groom isn't a manipulative abuser planning to isolate his bride from her family. Brittany walked down the aisle in a simple but elegant dress, her face glowing with genuine happiness instead of nervous perfection. James waited at the altar with tears in his eyes, and when he saw her, his smile was so radiant that half the guests started crying from pure joy. This is what love actually looks like: mutual adoration instead of possessive control. The ceremony was held at our family church, with 60 guests who actually mattered to the couple instead of hundreds of social obligations. As maid of honor, I stood beside my sister and watched her marry someone who deserved her. What a concept! Marrying someone who enhances your life instead of trying to control it. When the minister asked if anyone objected, there was only happy silence. When James and Brittany exchanged self-written vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. "Brittany," James said, his voice steady despite his emotion, "you taught me that love isn't about possession or control. It's about supporting each other's dreams and growing together as individuals. You've made me a better man, and I promise to spend my life ensuring you never doubt your worth again." Take notes, Derek. "Oh wait, you can't. You're dead." "James," Brittany replied, her voice strong and clear, "you showed me that I deserve to be loved for exactly who I am. You've never asked me to be smaller or different. You celebrate my strength instead of trying to diminish it. I promise to trust myself and trust us, and to never let anyone convince me your love is anything less than real." A direct repudiation of everything Derek represented. Beautiful. Their vows were essentially a point-by-point rejection of Derek's manipulation tactics, and everyone in the church understood the significance. Nothing quite like public declarations of healthy relationship standards to make an ex-abuser's memory irrelevant. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, decorated with flowers from Mom's garden and lights Dad had spent weeks hanging. Instead of a DJ playing generic music, James's brother played guitar while family members sang songs meaningful to the couple, personal, intimate, focused on the people they love instead of impressing strangers. During dinner, I gave my maid of honor speech. 2 years ago, I began, I watched my sister marry someone I knew would hurt her. Tonight, I'm watching her marry someone who makes her stronger, happier, and more herself than I've ever seen her. The difference between a wedding that fills you with dread and one that fills you with joy. The difference isn't just in the men she chose, it's in the woman she's become. Brittany survived something that could have broken her, and instead of becoming bitter or fearful, she became an advocate for others facing similar situations. Derek's greatest failure, trying to break someone who turned out to be unbreakable. I looked directly at Brittany, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm proud to be your sister, and I'm proud to celebrate the love you deserve. Love you deserve, not love you have to earn through perfect behavior." Later in the evening, James approached me during cleanup. "Angela, I want you to know that Brittany told me everything about Derek. She also told me how you never stopped fighting for her, even when she pushed you away. Smart man, understanding the full context of what Brittany survived. Not everyone would have handled it the way you did," he continued. "A lot of people would have given up or said, 'I told you so,' when everything fell apart. Tempting as that would have been. James," I said, "I need you to promise me something." "Of course. If you ever see signs that Brittany is falling back into old patterns, doubting herself, deferring to someone else's judgment over her own, will you speak up? The most important promise. To protect her from future manipulation, especially if it's uncomfortable." James replied without hesitation. "Brittany and I have talked about this. She's asked me to call her out if I ever see her minimizing her needs or opinions. They've actually discussed healthy communication strategies. Revolutionary concept." As the evening ended and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Ireland, Brittany pulled me aside. "I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again," she said, taking my hands. "Thank you for saving my life." Technically, she saved her own life. I just reminded her it was worth saving. The day Derek hit me, do you know what my first thought was? I shook my head. Angela was right. Not shock, not disbelief, just immediate recognition that you'd tried to protect me and I'd chosen to ignore your warnings. Sometimes being right feels terrible, especially when it involves watching someone you love get hurt. "You refused to let me disappear," she continued. "When Derek was trying to erase who I really was, you held on to the real me until I could find my way back. The most important gift you can give someone being abused, remembering who they were before the manipulation started. As I watched my sister drive away with her new husband, I reflected on Derek Patterson's ultimate legacy. He'd tried to destroy Brittany and divide our family, but instead he'd led her to the love of her life and taught us to recognize real love from manipulation. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing that happens to you. Derek had wanted to control Brittany forever. Instead, his abuse had made her strong enough to recognize and choose genuine love, poetic justice at its finest. 5 years later, I stood in the delivery room at Denver General Hospital, holding my nephew for the first time while my sister recovered from what she called the most beautiful pain I've ever experienced. From wedding disaster to perfect family, life has a way of working out when you remove toxic people from it. Baby Marcus James Chen was perfect in that way all newborns are perfect, with tiny fingers that gripped mine and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Named after both my boyfriend and his father, I'm officially the cool aunt. He's gorgeous, I whispered to Brittany, who was exhausted but glowing. James cried when he was born, she said softly, watching her husband pace nervously by the window. Happy tears. He couldn't believe something so perfect could be theirs. The difference between a partner who celebrates your accomplishments and one who tries to diminish them. Angela, Brittany said seriously, will you be his godmother? Officially? From exiled sister to godmother. Full circle redemption. I'm sure. If something happens to us, I want Marcus raised by someone who will fight for him the way you fought for me. Someone who'll never let him settle for less than he deserves. Teaching the next generation to recognize their worth, the best possible revenge against abusers. Of course. I managed around the emotion in my throat. I'd be honored. As I watched my sister with her son, I marveled at how far we'd all come. Brittany had built a successful career as a victim's advocate with the DA's office, helping survivors navigate the legal system. Her work had contributed to new laws, making it harder for abusers to manipulate the system. Derek's legacy, inspiring legislation to protect his future victims. James had been promoted to head nurse in pediatric ICU, where his combination of medical skill and emotional intelligence made him beloved by patients and colleagues. They'd bought a house 2 blocks from our parents, creating the multi-generational support system Derek had tried to destroy. The family Derek tried to divide is now stronger and more connected than ever. My boyfriend Marcus had graduated law school and joined the public defender's office, specializing in defending domestic violence victims who fought back. His work complemented mine perfectly. I arrested abusers, he protected their victims from legal retaliation. A power couple dedicated to justice. Derek would hate how well this turned out. Our parents had become doting grandparents who spoiled Marcus while respecting their daughter's independence. Dad had started a college fund and was planning carpentry lessons. Mom had knitted enough baby clothes for triplets. Grandparents who enhance family bonds instead of trying to control them. As for me, I'd been promoted to detective sergeant leading a domestic violence task force that became a model for other departments. Every abuser we arrested was potentially prevented from harming someone else the way Derek had harmed Brittany. Derek's greatest contribution to society, inspiring better domestic violence enforcement. Do you ever think about Derek? Brittany asked suddenly. Sometimes, I admitted. Do you? I used to have nightmares about him for months after he died, she said. But now when I think about him, it's different. He's like a character from someone else's story. The ultimate healing. When your abuser becomes irrelevant to your current happiness. What changed? Brittany looked at her sleeping son. This little guy. Derek tried to convince me I wasn't worthy of love, that I needed to earn affection by being perfect. But holding Marcus, loving him unconditionally just because he exists, I finally understand what real love feels like. Real love, unconditional, supportive, enhancing instead of diminishing. And how does it feel? Safe, she replied immediately. Real love feels safe. The opposite of everything Derek represented. That afternoon, I found myself in the hospital cafeteria with James, sharing terrible coffee and talking about the future. She's going to be an amazing mother, I told him. She already is, he replied proudly. Did you see how naturally she knew what he needed? She'll protect that little boy the way you protected her. The cycle of protection continues to the next generation. She wants to return to work part-time after maternity leave, James said. She's not ready to give up her advocacy work. Derek spent months trying to convince her that her career didn't matter. She's proving him wrong every day. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey that brought us here. 6 years ago, I'd watched my sister walk toward a man who would hurt her. I'd tried to warn her and been exiled for my trouble. Today, I'd held her son while she planned her return to meaningful work, surrounded by a husband who supported her dreams and a family committed to protecting them both. Derek Patterson had been dead for 4 years, but his impact continued rippling outward in unexpected ways. His cruelty taught us to value kindness. His manipulation taught us to prize honesty. His attempts to divide us made us unbreakably strong. Most importantly, his efforts to make Brittany smaller had ultimately made her larger, more confident, more purposeful, more determined to help others avoid what she'd endured. The best revenge, turning your abuser's worst efforts into your greatest strengths. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. "Thank you for never giving up on me. Marcus is lucky to have you as his godmother." I smiled as I typed back, "Thank you for finding your way back to yourself." That little boy will grow up knowing exactly what real love looks like. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about family, resilience, and the power of never giving up on people you love. Sometimes the most painful experiences lead to our greatest victories, and sometimes the people who try to hurt us end up making us stronger than we ever imagined. The Morrison family learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it completely. And now, with baby Marcus sleeping peacefully surrounded by people who will spend their lives protecting him and teaching him his worth, Derek Patterson's story is finally, completely over. Our story, however, is just beginning.